my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am bringing you guys some fall recommendations. So just to explain a little bit about the kind of books that I will be including in this video, I am planning on doing a completely separate video about thriller and horror novels. There are some books on this list that have spooky and creepy elements, which are perfect for the fall and Halloween season, but I will save the truly scary and terrifying books for that other video. And there's also a variety of genres going on. I have some adult romance, adult mystery, and quite a few YA paranormal and fantasy picks. I will be upfront with you guys, most of the books on this list are fairly popular, but I wanted to talk about them anyway in case they slipped your mind in terms of what books to read that are perfect for the fall season. So yeah, without further ado, let's just get into it. I think first I'm going to talk about books that I don't have physical copies for. So the first one is Where Dreams Descend by Janella Angelis. This is book 1 in her Kingdom of Cards duology. I thought this was going to be a longer series, but as of right now, it is going to be a duology. I read this pretty recently, actually. I did feature it in my mid-September wrap-up, so I will of course link that up in the cards above if you want to check out that wrap-up. But I loved this book. This is a really cool book. It is a YA fantasy story that incorporates elements from Moulin Rouge and The Phantom of the Opera, so if that appeals to you, I definitely recommend checking out this book, because I will admit that I was hesitant going into this because of those big claims, but I personally think that this book does live up to them. So this is essentially about 3 main characters. We have Kalia. She is a magician and she lives in this mysterious club essentially, but she's like the main headliner magician. And there's this guy Jack who has been her mentor for years. He is definitely the phantom type character, the way he kind of controls Kalia and messes with her mind. He is a very skilled magician and he wants her all to himself. But she sees a flyer for this magician's competition that is happening in the local city. She ends up running away because she really wants to compete in this competition, and she does worm her way into it because at first they were like, we don't allow female magicians, but she kind of proves them wrong with how amazing of a magician she really is. And then the third main character is DeMarco. He's one of the judges for the competition, but he also was a very prominent magician with his sister, but then something really tragic happened to his sister, and so he gave that up. And so there is a love triangle going on, of course, in Phantom of the Opera fashion, and I really had a fun time with it. The atmosphere of both the club that Jack owns and the city that this primarily takes place in, it definitely gives me autumnal vibes. While reading this, I definitely thought of like a dark and cloudy atmosphere. The buildings to be kind of dark and gothic looking. I'm not sure if that's quite what Janella Angelis was going for, but that's definitely what I got out of the story. I definitely think this will be a great fall read. The next book I want to talk about is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. So this is a mystery kind of thriller. To me, it's not thrilling enough to include in my thriller slash horror video that I'm gonna make soon, but this book is definitely more rooted in dark academia and Shakespeare and things like that. So this is about Oliver. He has been serving 10 years of jail time. He has just gotten out of prison for a murder that he may or may not have committed, and so the detective who worked on the murder case is now questioning Oliver once again, and now Oliver is finally willing to share the real story of what actually happened. So the main part of the story is one big flashback 10 years in the past. This takes place at an elite arts college, and all of the major characters, I think there's about like 6 or 7 pretty major characters, they are in this Shakespeare acting program there. So of course we do learn the circumstances of this murder and how it actually happened, but what really gives me fall vibes is, like I said, the dark academia aspect, as well as, like I said, this is a Shakespeare acting program, so throughout the year they were doing different Shakespeare performances. There was this one scene where they did Macbeth outside, I think on Halloween night, and that was just such a cool scene to read about. I think if you love acting and you love plays, I mean, I'm not the biggest Shakespeare fan, but I really appreciated it because I do have an acting background. So just all of those vibes make it the perfect fall mystery read. Then I wanted to recommend a couple of books by Tiffany Reese. So she did this series with Harley Quinn, which was a trilogy of romances that take place around the holiday season. So the first book is her Halloween Treat. This, of course, takes place around Halloween. I will say the only true Halloween scene takes place at the very end. This is very much a fall-centered book with Halloween thrown in at the end. And then the second book of the series is Her Naughty Holiday, which takes place around Thanksgiving. Again, there's only one scene that truly centers around Thanksgiving, and then the rest of it definitely just gives me fall vibes. I love this series so much. I've read all 3 of the books in this series twice at this point, and I just think Tiffany Reese just did such a great job writing these rom-coms. Of course, they're really smutty because it is Tiffany Reese. The third book is One Hot December, so that one's kind of more centered around Christmas, which is why I'm not really talking about that one in this video. But I highly recommend these 2 novels if you are looking for truly autumnal romances. So next book I want to recommend is Down Among the Sticks and Bones by Shauna Maguire. So this is part of her Wayward Children series. I will admit up front, I've only read the first 3 books in this series, and I think at this point there's 5 books out, but these are really short novellas. So this series is about these children that have found portals into their ideal fantastical world, if that makes sense. So it is a portal fantasy, and they have come back from those worlds because of different circumstances. And so now they're acting very strangely, and their parents ship them off to this home for wayward children. So this is technically book 2 of the series, but it is a prequel to the first book, if that makes sense. I don't think you have to read the first book, but I think it's ideal just to get a good context. And so we're following Jack and Jill. They don't feel like they really belong in the real world, and so they find this impossible staircase. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they like open a trunk and there's a staircase inside, and they find themselves in this really creepy world. It definitely reminds me of like the English moors. It's very dark and cloudy. There's vampires and other creatures and things like that. And they find that this is like the perfect world for them, and it's a really cool story. This is the only book of the series that I've read so far that I gave 5 stars. I thought it was just perfectly done. All right, so next we're gonna get into the physical books that I own. So the first couple of series that I want to recommend are Vampire Academy and Bloodlines by Richelle Mead. These are very popular YA paranormal books, and for very good reason. I have recently been reading the Bloodline series and have really been enjoying it. I just love the world and the characters so much, but these are 2 separate series. We have Vampire Academy. This is the first series that you're going to want to read. And if you don't know what this series is about, we are following Rose Hathaway and Lissa Dragomir. And this is an interesting world because there are vampires, but there's 2 different kinds of vampires. We have the Moroi, which are actually pretty normal people. Of course, they have fangs. They are vampires, but they aren't all that different from humans, except that, I mean, they can go out in the sun, but prolonged exposure really isn't good for them. And the Moroi aren't like blood-sucking monsters by any means, because they have humans that are called feeders that are more than happy to give their blood to them. And then we have the Strigoi, which are these like undead vampires. They are definitely monstrous creatures. They have no souls. And then we have Dhampirs, which are half human and half Moroi. And then we have humans, of course. So there are, you know, a few different kinds of beings in this series. And so this series centers around this academy that elite Moroi vampires go to, as well as Dhampirs, because they are training to become bodyguards for these elite Moroi. And then we have Bloodlines, which is the spin-off series to Vampire Academy. And this one centers around Sydney Sage. She is an alchemist, and alchemists are humans that their job is to protect humans from finding out about all of these vampiric creatures. So in this world, humans and vampires are very separate. So essentially, quite a few characters from this series end up being major characters in Bloodlines. Basically, one of the side characters from Vampire Academy needs to be protected by Sydney, and so they move to Palm Springs, California, and enroll in a boarding school there. So there's definitely quite a different vibe between the 2 series, because this one takes place at at a vampire academy in Minnesota, I think, whereas this takes place at a human school in California, and there's very different things going on plot-wise as well. So yes, highly recommend both of these if you haven't read them yet. Next up, we have The Shadows Between Us by Tricia Levenseller. I have talked about this book recently on my channel. Specifically, I mentioned it in my video about authors that I need to read more books from because I loved this book so much and I just need to read more. This is essentially a dark YA fantasy romance, perfect for fall because again, the atmosphere just gives me those autumnal vibes, but also in this book we have the Shadow King, and he's pretty much the only person that has magical abilities, but his magic of course has to do with these shadows that he has, and that also gives me autumnal vibes for some reason. But we have Alessandra as our main character. Her goal is to seduce and marry the Shadow King so that she can murder him and take the kingdom for herself, but it turns out that there's somebody else that wants to murder the king, and she's like, wait a minute, I'm gonna be the only one that murders him, okay? And that's only gonna be after I marry him. This is definitely a Slytherin romance as well, so if that idea appeals to you, I wholeheartedly recommend this. Could not give it less than 5 stars. I'm pretty sure this is going to be one of my top favorite books of 2020. Next up, we have City of Ghosts by Victoria Schwab. This is book 1 in a middle grade series that Victoria Schwab is currently releasing books for. The second book is already out. That's called Tunnel of Bones. I also have a physical copy of that book, and book 3 I think is coming out in October if I'm not mistaken. But this is a really cute but also creepy and spooky series. This series centers around Cassidy Blake, and before the book starts, she nearly drowned. And because she had that near-death experience, she can now like pull back the veil that separates the living and the spirit world, so she can see ghosts. And her best friend is even a ghost. I think his name is Jacob, and I love his character so much. He's just so freaking adorable. But essentially, her parents are paranormal investigators, and they end up making this TV show that takes them all over the world to investigate different cities. And so this first book is based in Edinburgh, which is a really cool city and atmosphere to investigate ghosts. I just loved the setting of this book so much. But of course, there are plenty of ghosts, which is great for the Halloween season. There's even this not so great ghost that's doing some not so good things that Cassidy has to go up against. So that definitely brings in the creepier and spookier vibes, but it's a middle grade series. It doesn't get too scary. Next up, we have Three Dark Crowns by Kendara Blake. This is a series of 4 books. This is a pretty dark YA fantasy series, so if you're into that, definitely read this series. But this takes place on an island called Fenburn, and the island alone just gives me very autumnal and fall vibes. It's kind of a creepy atmosphere. There's also this mist that surrounds the island that prevents the major characters from leaving the island. So this is about this set of triplets that are born, and the 3 of them, when they reach the age of 16, have to fight to the death for the crown and the throne of Fenburn. There's a really interesting magic system going on in this series as well, because there's like 3 different types of magic. You can either be a poisoner, a naturalist, or an elemental, and each of the 3 queens is one of those kinds of magic users. Yeah, a very interesting and dark and twisted kind of world. The characters are really intriguing and compelling as well. So yes, this is like the perfect fantasy series to read for the fall. Next, I have a couple of series that I'm sure most of you watching this have read already, but I wanted to just quickly mention them because of the vibes that they give me. So the first one is The Infernal Devices by Cassandra Clare. This is book 1, Clockwork Angel, and this trilogy specifically just gives me all of the fall vibes. But this is a series that is a part of her Shadowhunter Chronicles universe, so she has several books in this whole universe, but this trilogy in particular takes place in 1878, I believe. And for those of you guys that don't know, this world has so many different kinds of creatures. We've got vampires, werewolves, shadow hunters, of course. We've also got fairies and warlocks, so there's definitely a lot going on. What really gives me fall vibes is not only the vampires and werewolves and demons and all of that, but also that this takes place in London, England, and a lot of the time when the characters are kind of out and about in the streets, it's very dark and cloudy outside, and it's just a really cool and interesting atmosphere. Also, this series has like these creepy mechanical clockwork robot creatures going on, and there's also a fantastic love triangle. I don't usually love those, but in this case it's done really well. And then the other fantasy series that I'm sure a lot of you have read is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. I did read this back in March. I did a binge reading vlog for it, absolutely devoured all 3 books. I will link that vlog up in the cards above. So this series gives me fall vibes because it is centered around the realm of the Fae and fairies, and the Fae that Holly Black has created are very dark and twisted and manipulative and just really interesting. Most of the characters in this book and this series are morally gray, which is really cool. Also, I did want to quickly show the illustration for the world this takes place in. Like, this map alone just gives me autumnal vibes. Just, everything about it. I love all the different creatures that we have, because it's not just fairies, there's also like mermaids and other kinds of fairy-like creatures. If you don't know what this is about Jude Duarte. So when she was 7 years old, her parents were murdered right in front of her by this fairy, and so he takes her and her sisters and steals them away to the High Court of Fairy. There is also a really awesome enemies to lovers, like truly an enemies to lovers romance with her and one of the princes of the High Court, who is Cardan. But yes, the different creatures and the atmosphere in this book is just everything and so perfectly fall. All right, my battery's dying soon, so I need to get through these recommendations really fast, but I have 3 books left. The first one is A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Brigid Kemmerer. This is a very popular Beauty and the Beast retelling, and for very good reason. I absolutely loved it when I read it back in 2019. So basically what gives me fall vibes is that Prince Ren, who is one of our major characters, his curse works so that he has to relive the fall season of his 18th birthday over and over and over again until he finds someone to love him. So yes, highly, highly recommend. Then I have Stalking Jack the Ripper by Kerri Maniscalco. This is a murder mystery YA series, and it centers around Audrey Rose and Thomas Cresswell. They both want to work in forensics, and of course that's very scandalous for Audrey Rose, being that she is a woman, but this takes place in London, this first book at least, and it does take place during the fall, so I definitely recommend this book. I enjoyed it a lot. It's not my favorite book or series ever, but it was a good time, and Thomas Cresswell is the best love interest ever. And then finally we have The Diviners by Libba Bray. This is an amazing YA paranormal, also kind of has fantastical vibes thrown in. It takes place in the 1920s. We have quite a few major characters, but our main character is Evie O'Neill. She moves to New York City from Ohio to live with her uncle because her parents just don't want to deal with her anymore. But it turns out she has this ability to read objects. Like if she's holding an object, she can tell the history of it and who owned it and things like that. And this is just a phenomenal paranormal series. Just highly, highly recommend it. Can't rave about it enough. It's one of my favorite series of all time. And this first book is a murder mystery story, so that definitely is perfect for Halloween. There are some moments that are genuinely scary in this book and in this series overall. That's going to be it for this video. I don't want my camera to run out. Thank you guys so much for watching. Would love it if you would leave a comment down below if you want to discuss any of the books or series that I brought up in this video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!